Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
This interview is coming from a rehearsal studio at the Atlantic Theatre Company in New York City. Atlantic is best known for the works of its founder, David Mamet, and it also loves to promote new writing. And with me today is Ngozi Anyanwu, whose play The Homecoming Queen is currently in previews. I was lucky enough to see it yesterday.
Oh, cool.
I think my view of it is I liked it a lot. I think there's still a little bit more work before you get to the final performance, but it's a worthy play and fascinating. First of all, rather than me trying to describe your play, why don't you describe it?
Oh, sure. The play takes us on a journey. It's basically a prodigal daughter story, and it's about a well-known writer who is sort of called back home by her ailing father, and she is confronted with a mixture of things that she has left behind.
Let's do the geography quickly. So she's called home from the United States.
From the United States, New York, to Nigeria, which is where she was born. Imo State, already to be exact, where Nigeria, which is the southeast part of Nigeria. Yeah.
So keep going. Sorry.
No problem. And she goes back there, and she's sort of met with the women who have been waiting for her to return. She's been gone for over 15 years. And the play is sort of an unlayering of why she has been gone, and a sort of meaning about past traumas and past things that she needs to sort of forgive within herself and within others in order to sort of move on with her life.
To what extent is it autobiographical? I assume that you are Nigerian and you live in the United States,
yes,
so there could be an extent to which it is.
Yeah, but
I
that's
kind of hope
much,
it isn't to some extent.
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, that's pretty much the extent. I am a child of two parents who were born and raised in Nigeria, in Imo State, and the inspiration for the play was a lot because my grandmother had passed away a few years ago, and my mother had gone to bury them. My mother and my father are from two neighboring villages, and the neighboring village had hounded my dad that he had never given his father a proper burial. And so my dad, the following year, then had to go back to Nigeria after 50 or 60 years from his father's passing, had to give him a proper passing. And it was a very emotional trip, actually, for my father. And when he came back, he basically laid out how he would like to be buried, and what I am supposed to do, and what our family, I'm one of 5 kids, American-born children, and basically our duty to him when he passes. He's in his late 60s, and so, he had a stroke a few years ago, and so, we're just sort of in the time of having that sort of very real conversation of, what happens if I'm no longer here. And that was really the sort of spark for this play, the idea of being a sort of someone who is very tied to my Nigerianness, but not in a lot of ways, and sort of what is the burden of taking care of family, and what is the burden of being bicultural and coming from two different, very distinct places.
And what about the Atlantic link? So did you write the play and then pitch it to Atlantic? Did they commission it?
They did not commission it. I had done my first play in California, Good Grief, and they were sort of aware of me through that play. An agent had passed that play to them before I'd signed with my current agent, Olivier. Hi, Olivier. And so we had sort of met last year. I met with Annie McRae last year about that particular play. And while they were looking for their season, they just had asked me, hey, do you have anything else? And I had already written this play. I was sort of near the first draft of the play, and so I sort of passed it to them, and it was really sort of a very quick process where I was like, oh yeah, sure, I have this play that I'm working on. It's near-ish done. Don't judge me on it. Thinking, I'll get a commission or a workshop out of this. And they were like, no, we want to put this in our season. And so I was like, oh, okay, let me hurry to write this thing to my satisfaction anyway. And so that's how it was brought to the Atlantic.
So what was the lead time then?
Say that again? What do you mean?
The lead time from the moment you met Atlantic to today?
So I met Annie probably around last year in the summertime.
So it's kind of 6 months from
Yeah.
Meeting at Atlantic to being on a stand. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. My agent was like, do not get used to this. And I was like, okay, I'm spoiled now. Yeah.
And you've got a fantastic space. It's in a relatively small studio space set out in Travis.
Yeah, it's about 97 seats. We took out a couple seats just so that we can kind of expand the space. Because they usually don't do that sort of seating, actually. They usually do proscenio seating. Yeah. And
do you think that's the right space for your play, or...?
I think it probably needs a bigger space. Yeah. I mean, originally the way that it was written actually is that there's a wonderful group of women who are in the ensemble, is that ensemble of women actually keeps growing. So the way that it's actually written is that it goes from 4 to 15 to 24, and eventually you see like 30 women flooding the house. should we get a giant budget? But the 4 women feel like 40. But yeah, I think it definitely, absolutely could use a grander and bigger space. But I will always take space that is offered to me because it is not common to get your play so quickly produced. So for us, we're really using this whole process as a testing ground. Hopefully it gets a bigger life and another life after this. But we're using this as a testing ground to just be aware of the space that we're in currently, and to make people feel like, oh wow, this could actually be even more expansive. We need to see this in a bigger space. We need to see this bigger costume. We need to see this with more rehearsal, But the actors are doing a really sort of fantastic job that I don't think you would know that we would get really 3 weeks of rehearsal.
Is that all?
Yeah, for a really big play, 2 days of tech, for a very big play in the stage 2 space. And so, the goal is to really show people like what it is that we got. So, yeah.
Have you got other stuff on the board at the moment?
No, we're looking to bring my first play, Good Grief, to New York, and I'm working on another commission with the Atlantic, so I have a commission with them. So I'm working on that play. I'm working on a TV thing that I'm not allowed to talk about.
I spend a lot of time talking to people about things that
they're not allowed to talk about. And I'm working on a new play called Nike. We don't need another hero, which is a sort of retelling of the Olympus myth through the eyes of the goddess Nike, but also with the sort of lens of blackness and Black Lives Matter. Yeah.
There's kind of a Greek mythic feel to the Homecoming Queen. Yeah. Is that just my interpretation, or?
I think that's fair. I'm a big myth fan, and I'm a big dream fan. I like just dreams. I like to sort of I don't know if it's going to be the way I end every play, but I like to end in a dream or a ritual. I think I'm a big people. Whenever you have to write like mission statements when you're writing for grants and things like that, people are like, why do you write? And I'm like, oh God, just read the play. And I think for me, I try and write the best possible world, and try and end with hope, even though this play has a lot of dark elements and comedic elements, but I always try and examine, oh God, what is it if we're trying to do better and be better? So I think that myth and storytelling sort of lends itself towards that structure.
What about the Nigerian side? Because, as you said, you were born in the United States. Your family is from Nigeria. Did you have any concerns that you would be portraying a Nigeria that was more out of your head than reality, or did you research?
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple people in our cast who are Nigerian American. We have one woman, Ibi Abasi, hi Ibi, who is our dialect coach. And all things, and also like our sort of like, Nigerian auntie of authenticity who's like, Ngozi, no. So we definitely had someone, for better or worse, who was like, no, that's not it. Or I would literally email my family and Facebook cousins who live in the Imo State and go, because it's so, some of the language is so particular to the village that my father is from. There's like the dialect, there's the language that is Igbo, but there's also like an Igbo of Mbise, which is the town. So we really worked to get, still working, in my opinion, to get that specific. Because I would go to my dad for something, which is right, but then Ibi would be like, no. I'm like, no, I think, but that's the way my dad says it. And then she's like, oh, that's right, because he's Mbise. So we worked, we're still working to get really incredibly specific. Some stuff I think is like not quite it, but that's just time with previews of like, can we let some stuff go due to the fact of like budget? We don't have money to have the elaborate Nigerian garb. We don't have necessarily time to like transcribe a scene that I maybe wanted to do in a different language. But so we're just sort of working with what we have sort of along this way and pushing it as far as we possibly can. But yes, the idea of authenticity is definitely like, ooh, is this going to be up to the Nigerian people? I mean, we actually also invite audience members who I know are Igbo, who I'm like, does this feel right? Does this feel right? But I think that's okay too, because I think it's also the memory of how Kelechi remembers Nigeria and how she feels Nigeria is. So I think it's also about the American perspective of a foreign place. So, I think we're allowed to take some liberties theatrically, but I try not to take too much. My parents will be mad at me. So, yeah.
I'm interested in the African American element because typically, if you think of African American theatre, I'll say August Wilson, who would be the person that everyone I think would think of, well, in the UK as well as here.
Sure.
But he was, if you like, an African American, putting it as a single word, as opposed to an African
From America.
From America,
yeah.
And I gather, because I haven't been around too much lately, I gather that there's beginning to be a body of plays that are written by African Americans, set in Africa, or with Africans just coming to America, trying to bridge that gap. Do you feel you're trying to buy into that culture, or are you trying to create something?
I mean, I just feel that that's just who I am. I try and just write from my perspective. I'm a first-generation Nigerian, and I write from, that's who I am, you know? August Wilson was not a Nigerian American, or I imagine that you would see that that's what you get out of the plays. He was a Black American / Afro-American, and so I think he wrote from his personal experiences and from his personal lineage. And so, you know, my parents came here late 60s, early 70s, and so, you know, being the age that I'm at, I imagine that you are going to see a crop of artists who are first generation, because that is a time when a lot of Black immigrants immigrated. And so, but those people did not have the privilege to become artists. And so the kids who they sort of pressured to be doctors and lawyers, you know, the rebellious ones, us, you know, we're now at the age where we're doing our art and we have this sort of tenacity and I would say OCD and, you know, work ethic of them, but we just chose to put it into the arts. And so I do believe that you are going to sort of see a crop of immigrant African children, like your first generations and what have you, second generations, that you're going to see sort of a crop of them feeling like they can tell their story, especially in the time that we are in today. But I don't think it's about sort of necessarily buying into what's going on. It's just like, this is where I come from. I come from dual cultures, and, you know, I'd go out into the suburbs and it's like majority white people, I come into my house and it's Nigeria and it smells like Nigerian food, you know, and I go to all the Nigerian parties. So there is a sort of, you know, I come from multiple cultures, especially also being a Black woman and feeling like a Black American as well, you know. Yeah, so I think for me, it's about telling all the stories that are within me, which are multiple identities.
It's interesting because I think there are kind of similar developments going on in the UK as well. So I didn't may not have heard about it yet. A play called Barbershop Chronicles by Anua Ellams, which it's coming back to the National. It was so successful first time around. And that is kind of a Pan-African vision from the perspective of London.
And I just feel like, you know, it's the time, you know, I think there's always just sort of times of when these plays come, you know, there's a sort of, trend is the wrong word, but maybe the word is trend, but I just think that, you know, Black perspectives right now, in my opinion, are becoming at the forefront of the culture. You know, when it comes to music, hip-hop is at the forefront, at the mainstream of our culture. And so Black culture is really, in multiple countries, becoming that. And so people are feeling more comfortable in droves to tell their story, you know, which is exciting.
I'm slightly dreading asking this question, but I think it kind of feeds off what we're discussing.
Sure.
A year ago, almost to the day, a new president was inaugurated, to the week, I should think, a new president was inaugurated. And I wonder whether you think that he might, in a very strange way, affect that kind of cultural vision and generate a lot of plays, perhaps from minorities generally, as a result of the statements that he, or tweets rather than makes.
Yeah. I'm super curious as to what is happening and what will happen due to the human being who is occupying the White House. Because, I mean, if I can be all the way frank, what it is doing is exposing a lot of theater's hypocrisy. There's a lot of banding together now that he is in our office. But quite frankly, I'm just going to say it. Quite frankly, if I look at the majority of the theater on 42nd Street and off Broadway, it reflects Trump's America. And I say that as far, it's not very diverse. There are not a lot of voices that sound like me or just that are different, and yet we all want to rail against him. And so for me, it is bringing to light a lot of the hypocrisy. And so I do believe you will be seeing much more art from different kinds of people, because it is now making artistic directors and associate directors go, how am I complacent? Or how have I been complicit in this? Can I critique that if I announce an all-white male season? And that is my big question. And so can I critique that if we consistently are disrespecting people who come into our house? Can I critique that if we're not working to have audiences that are from different economic backgrounds and, you know, to be in the audience and get to intake art? Can I critique this crazy person who has occupied our White House. I don't know that you can. But what you can do is go, oh, how am I complicit in how this is a representative of our country? He is very representative of our actual country. He is. Our country is crazy right now, and it's something that I, as a Black person, have experienced since I was 5. And now people are just sort of getting a taste of it. And so, but what I am not happy, I should say, but what I am excited about is that it is now making people feel that they have a responsibility to get their voices heard and to include other voices. I wish it would happen at a faster rate, but capitalism is a real thing, if that is an answer at all.
That's an answer, yes. So you got your eyes on the Broadway house then?
We'll see. I don't know exactly how that all works, but we're inviting producers to come and see it. So if they, I would not turn it down.
I'm sure you wouldn't.
You know what I mean? So yeah.
Your background, I think, is as an actor.
Yeah. I went to school for acting. Did my undergrad and my graduate school 4 years ago in acting. So I'm an actor first.
So how did you say you're an actor first? Are you still an actor?
I am still an actor. I'm actually doing a play in February. I start rehearsal in February in Pittsburgh for a new play by this amazing playwright, Corey Thomas. Hi, Corey Thomas, in Pittsburgh called Citizens Market, about immigrants who work in a supermarket.
And do you expect to be continuing the double act, acting and writing in the future?
Yeah, I'm a maker of things. I'm a creator of things. I also produce. I also direct whenever someone asks me. I'm a lifer when it comes to the theater and entertainment. So I really try and cultivate a space to make things. So if I can do that as an actor, great. If I can do it as a writer, wonderful. I'm probably trying to learn a little bit more as a director, so I tend to be in the space more than I would like to be as a writer, because I'm trying to learn from my director and see how it is that she works with designers and things like that, sort of on this level. But yeah, I imagine I will be, hopefully, maybe in charge of my own theater one day.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
You talked about your director. How did you and Atlantic find the director and the cast? Was that down to you? Was that down to them? It
was down to me. I had met Away maybe almost 10 years ago. We were both interns at the Public Theater in New York.
Okay, yeah.
I was an intern for Oscar Eustis and Jesse Alec. And she was a Van Leer fellow back when they had a Van Leer directing fellowship. And what they do whenever they start a new rehearsal in the Public Theater is that they have a giant round table or round circle and they introduce each other. And I heard a name that was not American. And I was like, that's not Nigerian, but that's Africa. You look like me. Let's talk. And ever since then, we sort of just kept aware of each other. We've never actually worked together on an actor-director level or writer-director level. So when I started this play last year, I said, hey, I have this play. She's a first-generation Ghanaian. And so I have this play that I think would make sense for us to start to work on. And so when I got offered workshops, I invited her to come along. And then when I got this production, I was like, this is the director I want. The theater was very kind, because that is not always the case. They met with her, and they were like, that's who I think it is. And so me and her got together and assembled this cast of people who also workshopped it along the way. And that's just people that we think are very talented and great, who are also, the majority of the cast are first-generation Africans as well, or Caribbean, but also some Black Americans. And so we tried to create this sort of disciplined bunch of sort of really phenomenal artists to get together and try and make this thing. But we've all had a relationship in some way, shape, or form. Either I've followed their careers and be like, oh my God, can we please see if we can get that actor? Or I've just sort of asked them, like, hey, I know you're busy doing this. Do you maybe want to do my play?
That's great to have that much freedom as a writer, as opposed to the theatre just saying, give us the play and go away.
And go away. It's really great. And this particular theatre, I think that's sort of the MO of them. They're like, if you're in our house, we trust you to be in our house. And even if it's a disaster, which I hope it's not, that's okay. We're invested in you, which I just think that's how it should be done.
It's also a nice compliment to the public that Oscar Eustis has this programme, and 10 years later, two of the people who met there are working together.
There are a bunch of people actually from that. I think I met Patrice Johnson when I was the assistant who had to read. I had to help actors run their lines. And one of the women who are in the ensemble, the one who plays the mother at the end of the play, and the woman who plays the sort of older woman who talks to her at the end of the play, I had seen her. I had helped her run lines, and she blew me away like 8 years ago. And ever since then, I'm like, this is not a big enough part for you, but do you want to be in this play? So that particular, they're just a bunch of beautiful theaters here that sort of have that effect on people, where they bring community together. And it's like, if I ever get a chance to work with you, please don't say no. And I'm so lucky that they haven't. So
Probably final question or series of questions.
Sure.
Interaction, whenever I speak to people, particularly young whatevers, they're loving what they're doing, they love working on the stage or with the stage, and then TV and film come along, and quite often I never see them again. I don't watch many films, I don't see much TV. Are you committed to the theatre? Do you like TV and film? Would you love to be in Hollywood?
I'm being pulled that way as a writer and as a performer. I think I'm someone who can and will do both. I love theater. I don't see myself not doing theater, but I also am someone who's a producer who's very much, I like to be in charge and have agency. And so the one thing about being an actor in the theater is that you have very little agency over your work and over your career. And so say I get pulled away from the theater for some time, I would come back as a producer or an actor who is helming something that I write with some sort of agency or control. But no, there's nothing like live theater. The film is great, TV is great, but you don't get an audience that there's nothing like it. So no, I don't see myself abandoning the theater. Famous last words.
Let's take those as the last words. Ngozi Anyanwu, that's been fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.